extra quick, Scott.
Oh, yeah. All right.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Okay, so let's get started here. Today we're going to talk about the new SAT essay, and it is definitely nothing to play around with. And if you're in a situation where you have to write the new SAT essay, get ready for some serious writing. We're not talking about the little simple argumentative essay that you had to write for the current or the old SAT. No, this is going to be much more involved. I wanted to say complicated, but I don't want to scare anybody, you know. So I'm just going to say much more involved, because involved has a much more positive connotation. All right, so let's begin. Okay, so the first thing we find out is that it's 50 minutes. 50 minutes. And so initially you think, okay, great, you know, because it was only 25 minutes before. Now I have more time. Oh, I'm sorry, this got it. So you think, wow, now I have more time. But once you start to look at it more, which is the next item that is the huge change in the essay, is that you have to read a passage that's between 650 to 750 words, and that's considered a big passage. Now, I don't know how fast of a reader you are, or how well you're able to get through reading passages. Well, because with this passage, you actually are going to have to pay really close attention to what you read. It's not like, you know, using some SAT strategy for the reading section where you read the first and last thing. No, you actually have to read this passage carefully in order to successfully use it in the essay. There is one question, of course, and it's going to be scored on a scale from 2 to 8, with 2 readers scoring from 1 to 4. But as I'm making this video, I don't know if that's going to stay the same. Because they haven't really released all of the information about the scoring yet. So areas of scoring are going to be reading, obviously, analysis, and writing. And writing, of course, is what the essay is about. So you would think that it would be all about writing, but it's not. But analysis is what is definitely new outside of the reading, because now you're going to have to analyze or show your ability to analyze, and we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay, so you will not argue whether you agree with the subject. That is irrelevant, whether you agree with the content, with the subject matter that is being discussed in the reading passage. You're not going to argue that. That actually would be easy, you know, to take a position for or against whatever the writer has written about. No, it's not going to be about that. You will take a position, and this is the catch. This is where the big stuff comes in. You will take a position on whether or not you agree with how the author presented the subject or argued his or her position on the subject. So in essence, this is kind of going to be a critique essay you're going to write. But in that critique essay, you are going to take a position. And without a doubt, in a critique essay, you have to use information from what you are critiquing, which will in this case be a passage of 650 to 750 words. That is, in essence, really someone else's essay. So you, in other words, you're going to leave yourself out of it. And this, I think, is probably going to be the biggest obstacle for students writing the new SAT is that they are going to be unable to remove themselves from the equation and properly analyze and critique someone else's work, because in most cases, most high school students. Now, if this was a test for a university student, it would be a different story. But for most high school students, they have yet to master the skill of analysis in that way without, being opinionated in your analysis. Okay, so continue. The text that you're going to have to read. Well, the level of the text is going to be between 9 and 10, or possibly up to first year university level. Students, of course, they're going to show their ability to comprehend what they read, which in a way is a good thing, because you're not being asked to make inferences here. You're being asked to simply observe or look at or analyze exactly what has been written and then critique that. So you're not being asked to read in between the lines and try to figure out what the author is trying to say, which makes it a little easier, but at the same time, it is not any easier in general. Okay, so where do they get this stuff from? Of course, it's coming from the Common Core. And if you're at a school who is actually following the Common Core properly, if you're in an English class where the teacher actually knows about the Common Core and is trying to follow it correctly, then you shouldn't have a whole lot of problems, because it's already in the mix, meaning that the teacher has already been preparing you for analysis, been teaching you about argumentation, and this is not going to be a big change from what you have already been doing. Okay, so needless to say, that is going to, or your ability or your preparedness from a high school standpoint or from an in-class standpoint is going to be based on whether or not the teacher has, done rigorous or very hard and scrutinated. I just came up with a word. Scrutinated instruction. Okay, so you will cite information from what you read without a doubt. You will have to cite, and if the word cite actually is really new to you, it's the first time you ever heard it, then you kind of at the beginning. Cite meaning refer back to in exactness what you have read, and then letting the reader know that you're using that information in an exact way to support what you're saying. Your ability to remember is going to become so crucial here, and this is why I said you're going to have to read carefully, because the more information that you can retain from what you read, it's going to translate into your ability to recall facts and other things is going to help you write this essay. So retaining information is going to be very important. Sentence structure, as well as grammatical syntax, and the various things that go along with writing, of course, are all going to apply on the essay. Even more so now, since they're making a point to say, look, we're going to be looking at your grammar. In essence, this is what it's saying. Then that means that you're going to have to step up, and you're going to have to, pay closer attention to your ability to write, or, better yet, to your ability to proofread what you have written, because most little simple error in grammar and sentence structure is really just carelessness on the student part by not looking back and doing revision. So this is that definitely can be, dealt with. Okay, so let us continue here. Of course, this is all in the context of the essay, the extended discussion, but we're kind of going to veer off for a little while into a totally different, or what I would consider a totally different subject, and that is author's argument or understanding argumentation. Now, this subject, although can be taught in an English class, it is also suited to be taught in a psychology class, because analyzing argument or perfecting your ability to argue involves things like reasoning and logic and emotions and these different things that are psychological issues. But as a writer, you have to do this. So you need to know about it. So whether you're learning this in English class or whether you're learning this in psychology class, the point is you have to learn it. So it really doesn't matter where you're learning it at, but you cannot, and I'm gonna just say this before we even get started, you cannot or you will not be able to write a proper new SAT essay without fully understanding the process of argumentation. It's not going to happen for you. So this is a subject in itself that needs to be learned and mastered if you're going to attempt this new SAT essay. And I really can't imagine a university not requiring the essay. I can't imagine that. Okay, so argumentation. This is basically when an author, takes a position on an issue. And of course, you've done it 100 million times on essays. Okay, so, but this process of going from opinion to fact, or going from stating an opinion to trying to persuade a reader to believe that it is in fact a fact, this process is called argumentation. And our ability to do this, of course, results in whether or not the person or audience that we're trying to convince or persuade will be persuaded or will agree with us. Okay, so what is an argument? I just kind of said that. Okay, an argument is the position or opinion or belief that he or she, and we're talking about the author, he or she wants to persuade us, the reader, okay, to believe. Whether it's the chocolate is the most healthy food on the planet, whether it's Toyota is the best car company in the world. Whatever it is that you have taken a position on, it requires some skill to get someone else to believe it or agree with it. When you think of this word argument, of course it elicits, negative connotations. It has negative connotations that elicits negative responses. But it's not negative in itself. Argument can be good. Argument can bring people together. Argument can help solve problems. Argument can make things that are unclear clear. People can walk away from an argument with a better understanding of something. So it's not all about, the argument that you had with your friend last night because of this, or the argument that you had with your mother because you wanted to go to the mall. That's not argument totally. That is an aspect of argument, but there's a more academic, or there is more academic value to argument, and there is an academic way in which one can successfully argue a point. So we must keep that in mind as we're talking about this. This is a very positive subject that we are discussing here. Okay, first thing we must do whenever we're looking at an argument, or the process of argumentation that an author has, went through. First thing we need to look at is the issue. We must decide whether the issue is an issue that is controversial, is an issue that, actually can be argued. There's some things that can't be argued. For instance, trying to pose an argument that the earth does not have a moon. That is not really a credible argument that, that's not something to be argued. It'd be better to maybe possibly argue at one time the Earth had two moons. I mean, you could probably argue that. Maybe you have some scientific references, blah, blah, blah. So we must ask our question, is this a controversial issue? And then we will know whether or not, in the very beginning, whether or not the author starts off with a good argument. Now, the author's argument, of course, we know is his or her position on the issue. So that means that the very next thing you're going to have to ask yourself is, what is the author's position? Now, if it's a standard type of essay or argument in written form, then you're probably, or even in non-written form, you're probably going to get the position at the beginning. And when I say at the beginning, it could be anywhere from the first sentence to the first two paragraphs, but somewhere in there you're going to get explicitly the position of the author. In most cases, unless the author is trying to do something else, and for that reason they're going to withhold their position and not let you know what it is. Okay, now the next thing you want to ask yourself is, what assumptions is the author making about the reader? Because based on the assumptions that the author is making about the reader, it's going to dictate how they present their support or evidence, or what type of support or evidence that they present. For instance, if we're talking about the blood vessels in the heart, and the author is taking the position that salt constricts the blood vessels in the heart. Now, if the author makes the assumption that the reader is also a doctor, the audience is also an audience of doctors, then he or she is going to use very doctorish terms and terminologies, and they're going to write very scientific, and they might mention some studies as a matter of factly, assuming that if you're a doctor of hearts, then you've already read the study too, you know what I'm talking about. But if the author makes the assumption that the reader knows nothing about the heart, then of course he's going to tone everything down, or she is going to tone everything down, make the language layman language that everybody can understand, and probably be a little more explanatory with the support and evidence, maybe even different evidence that maybe everyone knows about the heart. So based on that, based on what I just said, that is a valid question to ask. What is the author assuming about the reader? Okay, or what does the author take for granted about the reader? And based on that, you can determine whether or not the assumption is illogical or incorrect, and then you can make a determination based on that whether or not the argument in itself is actually good. Okay, so now once you decide that, you need to decide if the argument is credible or not. Is it a credible argument? And what is a credible argument? A credible argument is one that is believable, one that presents evidence properly, one that doesn't make assumptions that are illogical, and one that attempts to present the information in a way that would allow for the reader to at least understand what is being said, as well as maybe even possibly confirm what is being said. So believable credibility is important. Now, that brings us to our main point and the whole reason that we're talking about argumentation and the connection that it has with the SAT essay, the new SAT essay. Based on the questions that you have to ask and based on how the author has answered those questions, you're going to come in contact with, while reading this author's essay or passage, how he or she supports or proves their position. And the only credible way for an author to do this is to provide evidence, to provide proof. Because without proofs and evidences, then you don't have an argument. So, and of course you're not going to convince anyone. So you're being asked, in essence, to evaluate the evidence that the author has used and how the author has used it. So, how the author has used the evidence and what type of evidence the author is using, and which is the third point that you're being asked, is how does the author put that together? So this is why we have to discuss argumentation, and we're at the point, the most important part of our discussion, and the longest part, identifying the evidence. Because if you don't know that the author has used the evidence, then you have nothing to critique. You have to be able to identify when the author is using evidence and the type of evidence that the author is using. So there's a certain amount of understanding when it comes to evidence that you have to have. Now, on the SAT essay, they call it features of support. Okay? Now, features of support basically can be the way the author supports the argument. Okay? Now, so you have to ask yourself, how does the author support the argument? In what ways, what techniques does the author use? And of course, the techniques and ways are going to involve the usage of evidence, such as, research finding studies and personal observations, so forth and so on. Quotes from those who know about the subject that they are discussing. So, the ways to support an argument, there are three. There are three ways in which an author can support an argument. Three ways in general. Now, we want to focus on these three ways because in the features of support, because you have to select the features of support that the author uses, we can identify or attach those three features with the three main ways an author can support an argument. Okay, and I tell you what, we're going to stop here and we're going to make, from this point on, part 2. In part 2, we're going to talk about the three ways to support an argument, and now we're really getting into the meat of the SAT, new SAT essay, and what they're asking you to do with that.
Okay.
This is an Islamic school.
We'll talk about tomorrow. Yeah, that's rolling the hard way. We don't want to roll quite that hard. We want to get one of them little minibuses.
What's up?
A person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Everybody's gone out of their mind.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class.
Welcome, Mr. Quick's class.
Oh, yeah. All right. All right.